It's time for all of us to set our differences aside and get on to our jobs, which is to make Hartford schools work for all of Hartford's children. Thank you.
Thank you.
Making the grade and some gravy besides, or more to the point, is there a profit to be made on making public schools private? Ask the folks in Hartford, Connecticut. The city's Board of Education is putting a private company in charge of its entire public school system. The company is Education Alternatives, Inc., and its 5-year contract and mission gives it near total control of everything from Hartford's $171 million school budget to $29 million in state and federal grants. Education Alternatives pays all the bills, buys all the supplies, and negotiates with all the teachers and administrators. Now, if it does all of that right, and all expenses are paid, anything left is Education Alternatives to keep. Supporters like the idea. They say that it's better for students, better for teachers, and a lot better for schools, period. Opponents, led by the nation's top teachers union, aren't so sure. They say that businesses are more interested in making money than educating students. Joining us now to debate both sides of this issue, Albert Shanker, the president of the American Federation of Teachers, and Jeanne Allen of the Center for Education Reform. They both join us out of the nation's capital. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Shanker, first of all, why don't you like this?
Well, it's been tried. It hasn't worked. It's been tried in Baltimore, where the same company manages 9 schools. And what's happened is the test scores have plummeted. They've gone down. The company has been cited by the federal government for taking monies away from disabled youngsters and making a profit on that, putting them into regular classes and not giving them the services that they're guaranteed. They've been hit by the federal government with another charge of using monies for the disadvantaged youngsters. They've raised class size. They've essentially taken things away from children so that they can make a profit. And the scores show it. So what Hartford is doing is hiring a company that has failed in the one other big job that it's had in Baltimore. I mean, this is like going out and hiring a company that has had one other chance to do something and absolutely botched it up, and then you bring them in to run your whole school system. I think that the Hartford school system is out of its mind for doing this.
Go ahead, Ms. Allen. How do you feel?
Well, I was just going to say, Al and I differ on this subject considerably. First of all, these are the same folks, Mr. Shanker's union and other folks that he associates with, that are telling us to wait 5 years, wait 10 years to see reform come about. Give us time, they say. We've given them time. Now we look at Baltimore, which has been in existence for a year, the experiment with educational alternatives there. Really and truly, the jury is still out. You're comparing apples and oranges when you look at test scores. It's only been in existence for a year. Meanwhile, EAI and companies like it all around the country have been doing remarkable things with public education for years. There's been wonderful partnerships in place. Are the people in Baltimore stupid? Mr. Shanker's union has done lots of studies about this. They've dismissed them for now and said, we want to wait. We appreciate that, but we want to wait. And I think that you and I, Al, should look at Hartford and say, you guys aren't stupid either. There's a school board. This is local control. We value local control in this democracy. Let's let these folks give EAI a chance to clean up their schools. They haven't been able to do it of their own volition right now because the system is too bureaucratic. They're turning it over to the private sector and saying, you make it work. I think we need to give that a try.
Well, half of your argument is right. I don't like what the Hartford schools are doing, but that doesn't mean that you turn around and go to an outfit that doesn't know what it's doing and turn it over to them. Now, you mentioned the fact that they've only had a year in Baltimore, but when EAI came to Baltimore, they promised. They said, we will have scores up within 1 year.
They did promise, and you're
probably... Not only did they promise it, but the kids have gone backwards for a couple of years. I don't know of any other place where kids have ever gone backwards.
Well,
Mr. Shanker, I'd like to make a point. Fundamentally, you are criticizing this new deal in Hartford because it's dealing with some institution which had sort of one-year experience in Baltimore. But in principle, what is wrong with turning over education to the private system? Why should it work worse than a place where it's very difficult to get teachers promoted on merit and all the problems of bureaucracy? Why can't the market work?
It might work. I didn't argue the general principle.
So
it's perfectly possible that 1 year or 3 year or 3 months from now or 5 years from now, some outfit will emerge which has a lot of smarts and a lot of intelligence and a lot of professionalism and comes in there and is able to bring in management into a public institution and get it to work much better.
So you'd be in favor of experimenting with private running of the schools, right?
Well, but I think when you experiment, you don't do it with you don't do it with a whole system.
But you've been doing that with the whole system for years.
Wait a minute. Jeannie, tell me why EAI should make money in Baltimore when the kids' scores are going down?
And Jeannie, if you can wait to answer that question until we pay our bills and go to this commercial break here, we'll get into the issues at hand here and as to whether teachers, at least in the public sector, do in fact make enough money after this.
One of the key ingredients to improving schools was the recruitment and retention of the best and the brightest. That came out in all of the reports that were published at that time. Well, in fact, recruiting the best and the brightest at an average salary of $23,258 is obviously problematic.
All right, we robbed Jeanne Allen of a chance to respond to some pretty sharp charges by Albert Shanker. I want to go back to her, Jeanne, of course, with the Center for Education Reform. Jeanne, the heart of the issue seems to be, at least from folks like Albert Shanker and others, is that companies come in to make a buck. They don't necessarily reward good teachers, as was evidenced by some concerns of union members, that in fact their bottom line is the bottom line for the company and no one else.
That's what's remarkable about this whole argument, Neil. Look at what happens in public education today. Schools don't have performance contracts they have to meet or they'll go out of business, but companies like EAI do. So when Al asked me, for example, why should they get money if students are failing, I want to know why schools and teachers should continue to get money when kids are failing. Now, that's one thing I know he and I agree on is accountability, and there's not enough of it in the schools. But why do we keep rewarding a failing school system? Now you have a company that walks in and says, I can do it, give me 5 years to show you I can do it. And he wants to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, there were problems in Baltimore, let's forget about this whole thing and not experiment with children. I say if we don't experiment with children now, we're going to lose another generation of kids, and I don't think we can afford to do that.
Well, and the other thing the problem for me with this whole issue of privatization is it sounds great, but most of the teachers I talk to say that they think one of the big problems today with education is the family and the breakdown of the family and kids that come to school and they haven't had sleep and they're not disciplined and they're not ready to learn. And I don't care if the biggest company in the world runs an educational system. How are they going to change that?
Well, first of all, it's not privatization. Let's remind the American people here that we're not talking about turning entire school system over to the private sector with no government accountability. There's a 3-inch document that EAI signed this morning, and it's got more strings and regulations. It's got plenty of strings and regulations, not as many as usually hamper the administrators there, but they've got plenty to guide them.
Well, what they've got there is really an outrage because basically, you said before that this is going to be a great experiment. This isn't going to be an experiment.
I didn't say great. I said let's experiment and give it a chance.
Well, it won't be an experiment, though, because this contract, the Board of Education is not even allowed to hire an independent agency. Like they couldn't go to Stanford University or University of Chicago to ask them to evaluate the program unless EAI agrees to it. So EAI has written a contract which is very favorable, which covers them up, which means that they're not accountable at all.
First of all,
you talk about accountability. Test scores are going down in Baltimore.
What about the accountability and contracts is getting a little bit specific for a lot of our viewers. What about this basic issue? How is a company going to affect that basic problem?
First of all, this company has been under a microscope for the last almost 6 months to a year as to what they do. You talk about evaluations. The information's out there. Hartford people aren't stupid. I think it's an insult for us to sit here and say the school board somehow is suddenly throwing their babies to this horrible capitalist company. Let's be real. They're looking for help. They've asked them in a partnership. Secondly, when it comes to the family, Kathleen, excellent question. Why, I ask you, I throw it back at you, are private schools in Hartford, small parochial schools in many senses, doing wonders with children who also come from low-income, single-parent families with drugs, et cetera, et cetera? It's discipline. You're right.
The answer to that is very simple.
I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, well, it's not only discipline. It's parents choose to pay money. The high schools, parochial high schools, have examinations for getting in. You use bad words. You fight in school. You bring a gun in. You beat up another kid. You get thrown out of the school. So when the public schools can do that, by the way, the public schools should be able to do that.
The public schools have been dumping people to the private schools for years. There are public vouchers on the books in 8 states that we know of, Al. Your federation in Arizona sends 8,000 public school students to private school a year because they can't deal with them. We know that while private schools have the right, we know private schools have the right to get rid of people. Do they? No, they don't.
When I was teaching school, the toughest kids I had in my class were kids who were kicked out of parochial schools. In those days, they used to hit them.
I know, but
and when their
times have
parents
changed,
hit them,
Al.
and when in those days, when the nuns hit them and they couldn't do anything with them, then they came into my class.
And you know what?
Mr. Shanker,
and you
you
know
are
what?
you are giving the best possible reason for really trying to shake things up in the
Thank you.
Hartford
Oh,
schools.
I think we should shake
Because
things up.
the fact of the matter is that you know, when you change the system, introduce a new system, maybe some parents who formerly went to the parochial schools will in fact go back to the
That's
public
right,
schools.
exactly.
What's wrong
Well,
with that idea? It apparently really needs shaking.
You
You
need
know,
a competition
you know-
on all sides, Al. Not just private schools are wonderful. You need the
You know,
competition
you're
throughout.
just shouting slogans. There was no competition in Hartford. Where was the competition? Where were the other companies? You know, this was a private deal. This was in all the Hartford newspapers, that EAI had an inside track. The Board of Ed met with them for months. After they had practically worked out the deal,
I think you're being a little
other-
unkind here.
I
Now, the
don't
fact that
see-
Al,
Where's the
wait a minute, Al.
competition?
You
Where's the
have made
competition?
a name for yourself, and obviously and deservedly so, defending teachers and their role in society. But the fact of the matter is, in scores of municipalities and districts across the country, when push comes to shove, the thing that a lot of Americans hear teachers jawboning about is higher pay and not necessarily better conditions
Thank
for the
you. Yes,
students
exactly.
involved. So isn't
Neil, let
this
me add
really,
something, too.
if Albert could answer, isn't this really more protecting your fiefdom than anything else?
Well, the answer is no, it isn't. Our job is to get higher pay, but we also represent teachers in many other ways. For instance, we have supported testing programs. We've supported programs to test teachers before they get hired. We have supported higher standards in colleges. We are opposed to automatic promotion. We are in favor of kicking out from regular classroom kids who are violent and disruptive. Here we're talking about the conditions that make it impossible to learn in a regular classroom.
Still, when it came to
And
addressing issues like tenure,
if you haven't heard us say that before, I'll be willing to give you 20 years.
Well, Al,
wait
tell
a minute, let me finish. I'll give you 20 years of columns in the New York Times, only about 5 of which deal with salaries, and the rest of them deal with exactly the kind of conditions that you're talking
You know,
about.
Al, that's
what we've
true,
been fighting
but
for.
when it's time to put those ideas to the test, Al, is I think where you guys fall short. Right now, if you talk to teachers in Hartford, if you talk to teachers around this country, which we do, the rank and file, not you guys in Washington, the nice offices, but the rank and file, they say, you know, we want to experiment. We want a chance to do something different. We want to be given merit pay.
But
we
Jeanne,
want cuts in tenure.
Jeanne,
They want
The
things you
company
guys
is
lobby
subject to the
against.
Jeanne,
regulations of the local community, Jeannie. How will they avoid the problems with unions? How will
Jeanne.
they avoid the problems of having to keep the unruly kids in class? Because you're not talking about sitting at private schools, you're talking about running a public school. Won't they have the
Kathleen,
same problem?
Well,
I don't think- I'm not saying that-
let me respond to Jeannie.
Wait, Al, I'm not
Jeannie,
saying,
you said
Kathleen.
you said that teachers
Al,
really like
I'm a
all
lady,
these things
come
that
on.
the union doesn't stand for. If that's so, I'm willing to go up to Hartford and put that to a vote of the teachers. If those teachers want EAI to
Oh,
come
you've
in,
been up and you've organized half
No,
of them that
no,
would vote in your
I
favor.
was
You'd be
up
up
there-
there before you could get off the plane. Come on.
I was
mean,
up, I was
I know
up
how
there.
these things work.
Come on, don't.
I mean, Kathleen, I want to answer Kathleen's question,
That's
though, about
nonsense.
unions and things like that. I'm not saying EAI is going to solve the problems of the world. I'm not an apologist for EAI. There are companies all around the country doing this. The point is, this is the beginning of the true decentralization. You know, you hear decentralization,
No, this is-
restructuring,
this
they're
is-
buzzwords.
This is the beginning of a bunch of hucksters coming
This
in
is
who've never done it before, who've never educated a kid in their lives, who've gone into Baltimore
You'll be
and
proven
taken
wrong,
money
Al.
away
Mark
from
my
poor
words, you'll be
kids.
This is
proven
why we're
wrong.
having
Put it
a problem in
into their
schools, by the way, because we just keep talking over each other.
challenge
But
you to fight
all right, folks,
yourself.
Jeannie, thank you. The show's over. Albert Schenker, I want to thank you as well. And for my friends and colleague Bill Woolman and Kathleen Hayes, I'm Neil Cavuto. Have a very good night, everybody. That'll do it for business.